Today we are looking at Sovryn, and of all the sort of DeFi on Bitcoin initiatives, Sovryn has perhaps the most grand vision of them all. Let's jump into it. Welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, Bitcoin pleb, and all-around raging capitalist. And yes, in today's video, we're going to be picking apart Sovryn. I'm really fascinated by what they're doing, and not just this sort of grand vision that they've laid out to become the kind of financial operating system on top of the Bitcoin monetary protocol, but they've also sort of put action to words and have made some incredibly impressive progress. So today we're going to go into what is Sovryn, why would someone want to use this, how does it work, and also what's available today and sort of what is to come on the roadmap. For all those returning to the channel, welcome back, my friends. As always, it is great to have you. I honestly cannot believe we're over 400 subscribers. I'm going to do a whole separate video on this, but when I started this channel, I really did it because I was getting a lot of different questions from friends, and I thought, why not make some videos on topics that I'm already in love with and kind of studying. And so this has just so far exceeded my expectations already. And so thank you to all of you. It has been an awesome journey thus far, and I hope you've gotten a lot out of it, just as I have. And for those new to the channel, I welcome you as well. I know there are many of you, over 80% of you watching right this very moment, are not subscribed. And so if you like this content, I invite you to subscribe and join us in our merry gang in cyberspace that is apparently a rocket ship. So cheers to you all. Again, I'll do a kind of separate video on this because I've just, again, been totally blown away. But without further ado, let's jump into the meat of today and talk about what is Sovryn and why would someone want to use it. All right, so as alluded to, Sovryn has some really lofty visions and has also delivered quite a bit of their roadmap, which is really exciting. So first, let's start with what is Sovryn. If you go over to their website, which is sovryn.app, you can scroll down and go to what they call their black paper. So in this, honestly, I would encourage you to go through this in as much detail as you want. I'll link this in the description down below. But it is an incredibly helpful document that outlines, their mission, the vision, the nature of the protocol, how it works, etc. And so we're going to walk through a lot of that right now. But as you can see in their sort of mission statement, Sovryn is creating an open, fair, and transparent financial system for the world. And what I really like how they've framed this up is as we look at these different layers. And so they call the base layer the monetary system, right? And of course, this is Bitcoin. And so since 2009, when the first Genesis block of Bitcoin was created, we have basically seen milestone after milestone of this inexorable growth of Bitcoin, the monetary protocol, which is super exciting. And, we've seen El Salvador adopt this as legal tender. We've seen various institutions of various sizes, adopt Bitcoin as part of their balance sheet. And so it really is moving towards becoming that reserve asset. Where Sovryn sort of places themselves is this next decade or this next layer on top of Bitcoin, which they call the financial system. And so this would be DeFi or decentralized finance protocols that create a permissionless financial system. And that is the key word, right? Permissionless, censorship resistant. How can you kind of take all of those great traits of Bitcoin and extrapolate them upwards into the broader financial ecosystem? That is what Sovryn is seeking to do through, think of the full suite of different kind of financial services that make up our modern financial economy. And so to do that, they're seeking to kind of create these primitives, as they call them, or essential building blocks for finance. So when they talk about Sovryn as this full stack financial operating system, they're seeking to do and enable a couple things in a decentralized fashion and in as trust minimized a way as possible. One is just being able to trade, right? Of course, that's very, very basic, being able to trade one asset for another. Another is lending, right? Lending and credit is not inherently evil. This is a basic pillar of finance, being able to provide funding in order to fuel growth or new business initiatives, etc., and that funding gets paid back in the future. If you have an actual free market wrapped around that, this becomes a very good thing. And then lastly is this kind of conditionally commit, so being able to either execute a trade or loan pending some future condition, right? And these three things, these three primitives, can be combined in all sorts of different ways to create the very complex, dizzying at times world of our modern financial system, whether that's derivatives, whether that's trading on margin, whether that's whatever the case may be. These are the sort of primitives that Sovryn is seeking to build in a trust minimized permissionless way. And so that leads us to the actual protocol. When we say Sovryn, like, what is it? And so the protocol comprises four main components as per Sovryn. One is being able to trade, lend, and leverage Bitcoin. And so Sovryn is a system built on the rootstock blockchain, or RSK. We will talk about that in just a moment. But essentially, it's a series of protocols that allows users the ability to, in a decentralized fashion, trade, lend, and leverage Bitcoin. So this is really trying to bring DeFi to Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is the sort of native currency, if you will, within that system. Number two, though, is that Sovryn's very focused on interoperability. And so they have created EVM-compatible smart contracts. So EVM stands for Ethereum Virtual Machine. So this means that they're creating and enabling smart contracts in a way that would be interoperable or have a bridge at least to other blockchain ecosystems. And so, as it says, this will ensure that there's as wide a scope as possible that taps into some of these other ecosystems. But at the end of the day, these smart contracts are being secured by Bitcoin proof of work. And again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Number three is everyday payments. This is, I think, actually really interesting. And so Sovryn's vision for everyday payments, I think they intend to ultimately integrate with a layer 2 system like the Lightning Network. I've covered that in a number of other videos on the channel. But their sort of big key that they're emphasizing here is actually around stablecoins and Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. So, as you can see, users will be able to easily transmit the value of their Bitcoin for everyday payments through Bitcoin-backed stablecoins without having to sell their Bitcoin or submit to KYC, or Know Your Customer, where you're sharing all sorts of information about yourself. And so this is really interesting, right? I think that's obviously a critical piece of the puzzle. And then lastly is around privacy. So one of Sovryn's observations, and I would agree with it, is that anytime you try and sort of extrapolate up to these layer 2 solutions, you often make trade-offs as it relates to privacy. And so what they're proposing here are these ZK-proof transactions that would employ additional cryptography to allow transactions to occur without revealing any data about the two parties in that transaction. And so how all of that maps to a sort of list of use cases, right? Why would I want to use Sovryn is the following. In terms of those permissionless trading tools, it's pretty obvious. And by the way, this is where Sovryn has really focused to date, is on some of these very foundational trading capabilities, but enabling traders or whomever to trade digital assets securely, leverage holdings to build wealth, meaning you could deposit some of your Bitcoin and earn interest on it, lend crypto, earn passive income, etc. In terms of everyday payments, as I was mentioning, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins as collateral. No need to sell Bitcoin to be able to complete payments, and scalability achieved through sidechains. Again, I think there's going to be a lot of different ways that everyday payments with Bitcoin are scaled off-chain. Lightning Network is just one of them. This sort of Bitcoin-backed stablecoin construct is yet another. In terms of EVM-compatible smart contracts, this is about integrating the Ethereum development community and providing a bridge to really to various sort of blockchain ecosystems, but then ultimately having these smart contracts be secured by Bitcoin proof of work. And you can see I've done a video on stacks as another sort of take on this DeFi in Bitcoin theme. But what's shared as a commonality is this philosophy of wanting smart contracts that are anchored into and secured by Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is, as we've discussed a lot on this channel, this most stable, purposefully non-changing monetary layer that gives you the most robust foundation to build on top of. And then lastly, as we said, is around privacy, where verification is able to happen trustlessly, and both parties in a transaction have complete privacy. All right, so that was intended to be a very high-level overview of how Sovryn is positioning itself within the sort of broader economy, as well as some of the key components of the protocol and the use cases that they enable. But if you're watching this and kind of learning about Sovryn for the first time, that doesn't tell an awful lot about how it actually works. And so in this next section, let's dive into just that. All right, so let's talk about how Sovryn actually works. So we talked through the sort of components of the protocol, and next what we can see is how that sort of maps to specific technology features. So again, we talked about smart contracts that are EVM compatible and secured by Bitcoin merge mining. We'll talk about that in great detail here. The scalable and trustless off-chain computation, and then trustless bridges to both Bitcoin as well as other blockchains. I think the really key part of this is how this entire system is secured by Bitcoin proof of work. And as has been noted a number of times here, it's accomplished through what is called merge mining. And so Sovryn as a system, Sovryn as what we can think of as a set of protocols, is built on top of the rootstock or RSK blockchain. So Sovryn itself is not a blockchain. It is rather built on top of the rootstock blockchain. And so rootstock is what's called a side chain to Bitcoin, meaning that all the various transactions happening on the rootstock blockchain are being connected in some way to the main Bitcoin blockchain, or the sort of parent chain in this relationship. And we can sort of see that visually here with this description from RSK's website, which I will also link, on merge mining. So what literally happens here is that Bitcoin miners, so those running ASICs, can extend their hash rate or their computation power to mine not only on the Bitcoin blockchain, but also on the RSK sidechain. And so this is what's called merge mining. It's also potentially called, auxiliary proof of work, but you're basically taking the same hash rate and applying it across multiple blockchains. I think that something like 40% of the Bitcoin hash rate is being also extended to mine the RSK sidechain, which is a crazy amount of computation. And so basically what happens is you have these various transactions and smart contracts occurring on the sidechain that all ultimately get packaged together and settled and linked, importantly, to a Bitcoin block, all being done by recycling the same hash rate. And then what's able to be accomplished as a result of this is what's called a two-way peg. So now that this side chain is fundamentally linked to the main chain through this kind of sharing of hash rate and merge mining process, this basically allows for a user to send Bitcoin to the RSK sidechain, or what's called as a peg in. So you can peg in your Bitcoin and you get what is called RBTC. which is sort of the RSK Bitcoin, if you will. So Bitcoin, on the RSK sidechain. And then you can later conduct what's called a peg out and take your RBTC and translate it back into just BTC. And then what happens is the gas for these smart contracts are paid in the RBTC. So essentially, this is, if you think about it, a way to bring Bitcoin into an ecosystem with which you can, conduct a broader array of different use cases. So there are other pieces beyond that, but I think that's out of the scope of this current video. As I mentioned, I probably will do deeper dives into Sovryn in the future because it really is this, sprawling kind of ecosystem. But the most important things to take away about how this actually works is that Sovryn is not a standalone blockchain. Rather, it is sort of built on top of RSK, which is a layer 2 sidechain to Bitcoin. And therefore, it inherits this nice property of merge mining, meaning that the smart contracts that we can run within the Sovryn ecosystem are, in a way, secured by Bitcoin proof of work via that relationship with the RSK sidechain. So that's, I think, the most important kind of piece to understand. And we can kind of see a lot of that summarized here in their nice little graphic that they have on their Twitter. Again, I'll also link this. But they call themselves the fastest growing DeFi ecosystem for Bitcoin, the most feature-rich DeFi platform for Bitcoin, enabling asset swaps, borrowing, lending, margin trading, yield farming, staking. And we'll take a look at the actual application of Sovryn in just a moment. Secure and trustless using Bitcoin proof of work, and definitely lower gas fees. And so they've done a lot of work and kind of analysis on this, but Sovryn gas fees are certainly lower than what folks would experience on Ethereum. There's a lot of folks behind Sovryn as a project. And so really it's only been a couple months since the full launch of this ecosystem. You can see a couple of those stats over on the right-hand side. And then perhaps the final piece just to mention here in terms of how this works is the SOV token. So you may say, well, I thought this, Sovryn wasn't its own blockchain, and that is absolutely right. But it does have its own, what is essentially serving as a governance token, or SOV. Now, SOV essentially gives you a share of the future stake in the Sovryn ecosystem. And it's based on this concept of Bitocracy, so a scalable system of coordination where the rules are encoded in software and enforced by the blockchain. So this is essentially a DAO, right? A decentralized autonomous organization. And the SOV token is used to tokenize the rights, rewards, and risks associated with participating in Sovryn Bitocracy. So as you can see here, they say it's not an altcoin. Indeed, it's not a coin at all. Rather, it is a stake in Sovryn's future. So it's a tokenized representation of a true stake in Sovryn's future. It is essentially commensurate with voting power on different, enhancements and features that can be built in the ecosystem. And so you can then stake your SOV and accrue commensurate fees that the system generates. So it almost gives, this ability to earn a dividend, if you will, that's generated by the Sovryn ecosystem. So pretty cool there. They're very careful to spell out that, this is not a sort of attempt to, create value out of nothing, which is what so many altcoins are. So many kind of founding teams saw what Bitcoin did coming out of nothing and creating this enormous value out of nothing. And so many have tried to replicate that, right? Like the philosophy here is we're not doing that. SOV rather is really this kind of token mechanism to coordinate voting power as well as risks and rewards. Because any change to the ecosystem, any new feature, of course, inherently carries some degree of risk. But it also may add value to the ecosystem. And so this token represents a way to kind of balance those two sides. So pretty interesting how they've thought through this. But with all of that, so we covered, again, how the system works at a very high level. We covered Bitocracy and the SOV token. Let's finally talk about sort of where the project stands currently and what is in the pipeline. Within the Sovryn homepage, again, this is sovryn.app. I will link this in the description down below. You can head over to the DApp, or the decentralized application. You can also just straight up go to live.sovryn.app, and here you will see the alpha of Sovryn. So this is the sort of full kind of platform. You can see there's all sorts of stuff here. There's trading capabilities. You can buy the SOV token, swap assets, spot trade, margin trade. There's financing applications here with lending, borrowing, yield farming. There's the Bitocracy, so the whole kind of governance layer to this. Different rewards. So what's really interesting about Sovryn is they've think of how with a centralized exchange, there's different referral programs. They've actually kind of implemented that in a programmatic and decentralized fashion. So there's still this kind of marketing and viral incentives, in a decentralized way, which is very, very cool. There's a number of different kind of bridge options. So it's a little bit hard to see because I haven't connected a wallet. But you can see that there's the RSK chain, the Binance chain, as well as Ethereum, and various ways that you can connect different pieces together. Now, I will say that there is just a lot here. I mean, there is a lot packed into what is even still relatively early in their broader vision. But I would really encourage you to check out their wiki. It is incredibly well laid out. It's wiki.sovryn.app. I will link this in the description as well. But it sort of gives you, welcome to the Sovryn Wiki. It has all the official channels through which they communicate. So you can take a look at some of these pieces. And then it also has this very helpful kind of getting started section that I think is an absolute must if you are so interested in any of this. So this getting started with Sovryn page is particularly useful. It goes through some of the main questions, and then it gives you the setup guide to get everything set up. So there's a lot here. I do think right now this is certainly still geared towards a much more kind of power user type profile. But I do know over time they're going to be focusing more and more on user experience and making it really, really easy for anyone to be able to kind of come in and leverage the richness of this ecosystem. We also can get a sense of what's on their current roadmap here on the left, which is nice. This is rather granular, so it'll basically show the current month and all the different kind of pieces that are slated to happen within that month. But it's still a good way to, to stay in the loop. I also think just following them on Twitter, I have found to be a good way to stay in the loop on some of the more major builds. If I go back to their homepage and go down to their blog, this also has a lot of useful information. But I want to point all these sources out just because there is a lot going on in this ecosystem. And so these are some of the best ways I have found to kind of stay in the loop if you are so interested. Just a final note as well, on this channel, as you've probably recognized for those who have been following this, I typically orient the content around the hodler, right? The long-term hodler who's not worried about the day-to-day fluctuations. And even if I do go into some more kind of charty views and topics, it's really to illustrate what's driving the price movement such that we develop an ever better understanding of this thing that is Bitcoin to give you more and more conviction to hodl through the ups and downs. And so in all transparency and fairness, I do think Sovryn currently, at least where they've placed their emphasis initially, is probably more geared towards like an active trader. That's kind of the last thing I would encourage you to do is go and margin trade on Bitcoin, right? I'm always going to be the one to tell you to just stack sats and hodl. However, there are some cool pieces here around being able to earn yield on your holdings, earn interest on your stack. There's obviously pros and cons of that as well. There's risk to Even though Sovryn is built around enabling you to keep your coins, or to keep your keys rather, right? Not your keys, not your coins. There are still, of course, risks with any sort of lending of your stack. But I just wanted to mention that. I do think as the ecosystem develops, it's going to get really exciting really fast for even the kind of more hodler profile. But just something to keep in mind as you do investigate this. With all that out of the way, though, let's go ahead and close this video out. All right, so there you have it, my friends. We covered a lot of ground in this video, and it's pretty hard to do justice to the sort of broad vision and set of achievements that Sovryn has gone through. But just as a quick recap, we took a look at what Sovryn is, right? This kind of set of protocols built on top of the RSK sidechain to Bitcoin, and thus it enables and extends a lot of the DeFi use cases that we've thought about, and secures those various smart contracts with Bitcoin proof of work, which is very cool. We saw the sort of vision of Sovryn becoming this kind of financial operating system that is sort of layered on top of Bitcoin, the monetary protocol. And so they really do want to kind of accomplish, not just sort of the trading aspect that they've focused on to date, but also extending this to more and more kind of real world individuals. Think about things like getting a mortgage or, raising equity for a startup, right? All of these are use cases that they want to go after. And we took a look at how the actual protocol works at a high level. We talked about their, theory of governance with Bitocracy and the SOV token. And then we took a look at the, the sort of application, the live sort of decentralized app that is the current kind of Sovryn app, and as well as some of what's to come. So very, very exciting stuff. I was excited to do this video. And I'm excited to track the progress of Sovryn as well. If you're not already subscribed, I encourage you to do so, because there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff coming from this ecosystem in the coming months. But I hope you found this valuable and useful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like, comment down below with your thoughts, questions, reactions. What would you like to see covered in future videos related to Sovryn or more broadly? I really do take that into account when making the schedule for the channel. But for now, we are going to go ahead and leave this video here. As always, my friends, every sat counts. And until next time, I'll see you then.